All right, our Tweetable project has a little more components to it. So I just wanted to go through some of the technical aspects of this pair of fingerless hand warmers with you. The first part is to make a garter stitch cuff, and we're creating a really nice border on either side of the cuff by doing a simple technique of keeping your yarn in front and slipping the first 3 stitches. Then taking your yarn to the back and knitting the remainder of the row. You do this right from the cast on edge, and you do it at both sides of your work to create a nice little cuff with what looks like an I-cord trim at either side of it. So when you get to the end of your row, turn your work, keep your yarn in front, and slip the first 3 stitches. Take your yarn to the back and knit the rest. You're going to continue to work the cuff until the cuff is long enough to fit around your wrist. So continue to make your cuff until it fits around your wrist. I'm going to measure mine here, and I'm at 6.5 inches. So at this point I'm going to stop, and the next instruction is to bind off. So for the bind off part, we're just going to bind off the regular way. I'm going to knit 2 stitches, pass the first one over the second. So bind off all your stitches until you get to the end of the row. When you get to the end of your bind off edge, leave this stitch on your needle, and we're going to pick up stitches along the inside edge of that I-cord along the top. If you had bound off and this side was facing you, it doesn't matter. They're identical, right? Okay, so what I like to do is preserve as much of the I-cord as possible. So when you're picking up your stitches, I roll the cuff slightly towards me, find the stitch right along the edge, and then pick up 2 bars of it. If you pick up just 1 bar of it, it tends to stretch along here. So I like to pick up 2 bars. I'll bring this up nice and close so you can see it. So I'm inserting my needle under the 2 legs of the knit stitch along the very back, and I'm wrapping my yarn around my needle and pulling my needle up to create a pick up and knit border along the edge of the cuff. So needle goes under the first stitch along the border, wrap your yarn and pull it up underneath that stitch. Pick up stitches all the way along the edge of your cuff. I like to put them all on one needle and then transfer them to a couple more double pointed needles when I'm done. So let's do this part and then we'll tackle the next bit. If you're worried about your stitches falling off the end of this needle, you can put a point protector on this end. I just bunch them up, or if you like, you can transfer some of your stitches over to a second needle. Put 16 stitches over here. Leave these ones on this end. Just park them in the middle like that and carry on picking up stitches here. So I have picked up stitches along the edge of my cuff, and I have divided those stitches up more or less evenly onto 4 needles. You can place a stitch marker on the needles if it's feasible, but when you're working with double pointed needles, it often isn't. So what I do instead then is just attach a stitch marker to the fabric underneath my first needle. And that way, as I knit in the round, I always know that this is my first stitch because this is my first needle and the stitch marker is right underneath it. Okay, so I need to increase 3 stitches on my first round to come up to the required number for the hand of the mitten. And so I'm just going to do that. So join in the round and knit the first round, increasing as required to get the number of stitches for the base of the hand. I don't do any, there's lots of different kinds of increases that you can do. Do any kind of increase that works well for you. For me, that's just a knit into the front and then into the back leg of the same stitch. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, I'll meet you at the end of this round. Now we're going to place some markers and begin working on the thumb gusset right away. So we're going to knit the required number of stitches in the pattern. And here's where I may decide to switch to 3 double pointed needles. So that's not hard to do. You can transfer your stitches around, or you can just knit them onto 3 needles. So I'll do that while I place my markers here for the thumb gusset. And then I'm going to place a marker as per the instructions. PM means place marker. Knit 2. Place another marker. Oops. Knit 2. Place another marker. And knit to the end of the round. The next round is an increase round, and the increase happens at the point for the thumb. So we're creating a thumb gusset in between the markers. To do that, we've got 2 different kinds of increases, a make one right and a make one left. So let's knit up to the thumb and just go over how to execute those increases. So when you get to your stitch marker, slip it from one needle to the other, and we're going to do our first increase right here. The make one right says to insert the left needle from the back to the front under the strand of yarn that's in between the stitches, right there. And then you're going to knit that stitch so that it twists. That means that we have to knit into the front leg of that stitch. And here, sometimes what I do is just pull on that front leg a little bit to get my needle into it, knit that stitch, and then you're going to knit to the marker, and we're going to do a make one left. So for this one, you're going to insert the left needle from the front to the back under this strand of yarn that's in between the needles. And in this case, to knit that strand twisted, you will need to insert your right hand needle into the back leg of that stitch and not into your stitch marker. There we go. Into the back leg of the stitch, yarn over, and knit that stitch. So now, slip your marker over. Now you'll have 4 stitches in between your markers instead of 2. On the next increase round, you'll increase 2 stitches again. So you'll have 6 stitches, and on the next increase round, you'll have 8, and so on. So the instructions will tell us how many stitches to have in between the thumb markers before we do anything else. Once you have 12 stitches between the markers, we're going to change the number of rows between increases. So up to this point, we've been increasing every other row, increasing on round 2, round 4, round 6, etc. Once you've got 12 stitches between the markers, you're going to increase every 3 rounds. So there's just an extra round of knitting in between the increases to slow down the ratio of increasing for a little bit. We're going to continue to increase until there are 22 stitches between the thumb markers, and then we're going to remove the thumb temporarily while we work on the rest of the hand. So we just wanted to remind you just to pay attention to the pattern, and once you have 12 stitches between the markers, note that the increases will be happening every 3rd round instead of every 2nd round. Carry on. Once you've completed all the increases for your thumb gusset, the next step is to take your thumb off the needles and to park your thumb stitches for working a little bit later. So on this last round, we're knitting up to the markers that indicate the thumb stitches. There. I'm going to take off this marker and pick up my yarn needle that's been threaded with some waste yarn, and I'm going to transfer the thumb stitches from my needle onto my waste yarn. I'm just going to thread them onto my wool needle here. Taking off the markers as I come to them, thread those stitches on to my waste yarn. This particular piece of yarn is quite long, so I'm just going to tie a slip knot in it to keep it closed and tuck the whole thing inside my glove. All right, now the instructions are to cast on, let's see here, cast on 2 stitches behind the thumb. There's a couple of ways, well, there's probably more than a couple of ways you can do this, but one method is to use an E-loop cast on, which just has you take your thumb, wrap the yarn around your thumb, and pop it onto the needle like this. That's 1 and 2. This is an adequate cast on for something like 2 stitches behind a thumb, but if you want something that's a little bit stronger, you can turn your mitten inside out, or so that you're working on the back side, and do a knitted cast on. To do a knitted cast on, you insert your needle into the stitch and knit it, passing it back onto the left hand needle, and then insert your needle again, cast on another stitch, and you've got 2 there. It does so cast on 2 stitches behind the thumb and then knit to the end of the round, and then I'm going to knit the next few rounds as indicated in the pattern and come back to talk to you about how to join on the hand topper. So I've completed the 10 rounds above the thumb, and now it's time to begin the part where we put on the hand topper. To do this, the instructions ask us to cast on 8 additional stitches, and we're going to do that right at the beginning of the round. To cast on 8 stitches, again, there's a few ways you can do this, but I like to use a knitted cast on. So I'm going to cast on 8 stitches using my knitting needle like this. All right, so I've cast on 8 stitches on top of, at the beginning of my next round. And then we'll work row 1. So in this case, we're going to slip 3 stitches with the yarn in front. This is a lot like what we did at the bottom of the cuff. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to take the yarn to the back, knit 4 stitches, and then do an SSK. An SSK is a type of decrease, so we'll slip 1 stitch as if to knit, slip 2 stitches as if to knit, insert your left hand needle into the front of those 2 slipped stitches and knit them together like that. Okay, now you turn your work and do round 2. So with yarn in front, slip 1 stitch. It's kind of hard to see there because my pink needle's in front, but that's okay. Then with yarn in back, knit to the end of the row. Just going to push that pink needle out of the way a little bit, but not so much that it falls out of my work. Oops, knit to the end of the row. Okay, so I'm going to turn it again, and we're going to repeat rows 1 and 2. So with yarn in front, slip 3 stitches, dropped one there, so you just fix that. Okay, slip 3 stitches, with yarn in back, knit 4, and then do a slip, slip, knit. So slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, stick your left hand needle into the front of those 2 slip stitches and knit them together. Turn and do a row 2 with yarn in front, slip 1 stitch, with yarn in back, knit to the end of the row. Okay, you continue to do this until only 8 stitches remain. Each time you come across, whenever you do that slip, slip, knit, you're going to reduce the number of stitches on your needle by 1. So it will take a while, but you're basically working and edging all along the top. Here's another little trick for keeping the edge of your I-cord nice and round and firm. So slip those first 3 stitches, take your yarn to the back, get your next stitch ready to knit, and give it a good tug before you knit that stitch. Same thing on this end. Do your decrease, turn, slip the first stitch, put the yarn, so the yarn's in the front, slip the first stitch, put the yarn in the back, and before you knit that next stitch, just give your finger a little tug to tighten up those stitches at the top and the bottom. Every few rounds, or every few rows, when I come back, I like to give this end a little tug too, so that when I turn it around, I can see a nice round edge forming at the top of my topper. Okay, and on my next round, bind off. All right, for the thumb section, I'm going to put my stitches back on my knitting needle. There are 22 stitches. So I'm going to put 8 stitches on each needle. And I think that'll leave 6 stitches for the end here, or for the last needle. There's one more right here. My 6 stitches kind of sunk down, so I'm going to use my waste yarn to pull it up and stick it back on the needle. Okay, so I've got 8 stitches, 8 stitches, and 6 stitches. Now we're going to rejoin the yarn and pick up 4 new stitches and put a stitch marker in the middle of those 4 new stitches. I don't do anything special to rejoin my yarn. I just think about where I'm going to put those 4 stitches. So I see that there's a spot here, 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 and here, and what I'm looking at are the columns of knit stitches that are coming down. There's one right here. It's just above the edge where my needle is, and so I'm going to stick my needle through to the inside of my work. Going to place a loop of yarn over top of my needle and pull it up to the surface. So I have picked up and knit 1 stitch. Then I'm going to go into the next row over and stick my needle right in the middle of a knit stitch, yarn over, and pull that stitch up. Sometimes you have to do it again. There we go. That's 2. I'll put my stitch marker on, and then in the next column I'm going to pick up my 3rd stitch, and in the next row I'm going to pick up my 4th stitch. Now here I'm just going to pick up a stitch that's close to the edge. I could pick up here or here. I'm going to try and get as close to this needle as possible. So I'm going to pick up that stitch right here. Okay, so there are my 4 new stitches right here, and my tail is attached to that first one. All right, it says to continue to knit to 3 stitches before the marker. So that's what I'm going to do here. Pick up an empty needle, and I'm knitting to 3 stitches before the marker, so right to there. And when I have 3 stitches before the marker, I'm going to do a slip, slip knit, which is a decrease. And because I can, I'm just going to pull on that tail a little bit. And then I'm going to knit 1, pass the marker from one needle to the other, and now I'm on round 2. The marker indicates the beginning of a round. So on this one I will knit 1. The next instruction is to knit 2 together. So I'm going to pass this stitch over to this needle, and knit 2 together. Oops. There we go. And then you continue to knit until 2 stitches before the marker. And at 2 stitches before my marker, I'm going to again do an SSK. Pass my marker over, and then I need to start my next round. And so again, I'm going to pass this stitch over. And here, because I can't keep it on my needle anymore, I'm going to remove my marker And I'll just slip it into the thumb underneath this first needle. And then when I see the marker, I'll know that this is the first needle of my round. All right, so I'm on round 3. I'm going to knit 2 together and then knit to the end of the round. I'm just going to slip that tail to the inside of my thumb now so it doesn't get in the way. Continue to knit to the end of the round, and then we start the thumb topper. The thumb topper is a lot like the hand topper, the topper at the top of the hand, except that it's shorter. So for this one, we're going to cast on 5 stitches. I'm going to do a knitted cast on again. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. On row 1 of this topper, we're going to slip the first 2 stitches with the yarn in front, then take the yarn to the back, knit 2 stitches, and do an SSK. Slip, slip, knit together, turn your work, and with yarn in front, slip 1 stitch, with the yarn in back, knit to the end of the row. Turn your work. And do row 1 again. So with yarn in front, slip 2 stitches, take yarn to the back, get that needle in there, give it a good tug, knit 2 stitches, and then S, S, K. Turn your work, slip 1 stitch with the yarn in front, take the yarn to the back, give it a little tug, knit to the end of the row. Like with the hand topper, we're going to continue this particular sequence of round 1 and round 2 until you have only 5 stitches remaining. Each time you complete a round 1, you're going to use up 1 stitch on this needle till you free up that needle, and you'll carry it around here. So let's get that done next. Okay, now I'm going to sew up the side seams of the glove. I'm going to start with the seam down here at the bottom, and I've got a little bit of waste yarn here that I'm going to use. So to join up the I-cord edging here, I'm just going to come in through the middle of the knit stitch, right on the edge here, and I'm going to join it through the knit stitch on the other edge here by going through the 2 legs of the stitch on this side and back into the middle of this stitch right here. That forms a continuous chain on the edge of my I-cord. I'm just going to leave that for now, and I'm going to do a bit of a mattress stitch here on this side. So to do my mattress stitch, I'm just going to go through 2 bars on one side and 2 bars on the other side. I like to do it this way, mattress stitch, because I want to have a nice even seam. But you could also whip stitch it, or you could do you could choose a different area to sew in But once you've found your column of stitches, keep going so that it's nice and even. I'm going to give this a pull here. There we go. And then I'm going to carry on. So I think that the mattress stitch gives you a nice even hem, but I also think that if you don't like it, or if your seam isn't as even as you'd like it to be, I think this is a good spot to sew down a few buttons to make it look like you buttoned up your gloves, and to kind of hide any spots where you think that it's just not as nice as you'd like it to be. So sewing on an embellishment like a button after the fact is a good way to neaten up any edge that you think isn't quite perfect. But I kind of like the way that is. So I've done a mattress stitch up the side of the mitten, and I'm back to this I-cord edge again. So again, what I'm going to do is try to join the edges of the I-cord together with a little technique where I come into the center of a stitch. So if I put my needle under both legs, I see a bit of a V in here, and I'm going to put my needle into the center of the V. Just like that. Take my yarn and pull it up through the center. And then over on this side, I'm going to go completely under two legs, like that. Take the yarn back down into the center of this stitch and over to the next one. So now I've got two bars, and they're definitely V-shaped on this side. Okay, and I'm just going to give it a gentle tug. And then back to this side, in under two bars. Gentle tug again, and then back over to this side. In here, I just have one bar left, so I'll go through there. And over here, I don't really have much left. So I'm just going to stick my needle back in this spot. Give it a little tug, just to snug things up. Okay, and so I feel like that gives me kind of a continuous chain look across here. And again, if you felt like this seam created more of a welt than you liked, 1, 2, or 3 little buttons along here would look very smart. Okay, so that's one seam, and we're going to do the same thing here. Just work on a seam here and a seam here. And then I'm going to come back and show you how I like to work the duplicate stitch border, or sorry, the duplicate stitch embroidery for the back of the hand.